Hello, welcome to this DevNet video about Network as a Code. Today we are thrilled to have Rafael Muller with us, a principal engineer at Cisco, who is going to share some insights on Network as a Code solution and tools by Cisco Customer Experience. Hi Rafael, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be part of the Cisco DevNet family.
My first question is, how does Network as a Code look like nowadays?
It's really interesting. It's how we have had a lot of an evolution since we started with this capability. So originally, when you look at NetAsCode, it started only with ACI in, I'm going to say about now 5 to 6 years ago. And, the reason for that obviously is when you look at ACI, it's really, really good programmatic functionality way to interact with Cisco equipment, right? It's an API first structure and product, and overall its API has always been rock solid, right? Not a lot of changes. It's been good. So the team had developed in Europe a capability that was called ACI as code, and then it became Nexus as code, and now it's becoming Network as code. And the focus of that capability was purely around implementing infrastructure as code structures for working with ACI in general. Today, that capability has been expanded. Where we started just with that structure in ACI, now has grown. We provide capabilities on a lot of different products in Cisco, so you can use this now for ACI, Nexus Dashboard, Catalyst Center, Meraki, right? vManage, etc. And then we're also now expanding that and starting to work on direct-to-device constructs. So doing the same capabilities, but for iOS XE, for NXOS, and iOS XR. Yeah. So what has happened is that this evolution of this capability now continues to grow, and interest in the customers in this capability continues to grow based on wanting to have a form of infrastructure as code capability that they can perform on their networks, right? And I think that evolution, right, from experimentation in ACI, full-blown usage in production networks in ACI, to then now expanding across the portfolio, just natural progression that we've been building upon. And we've also worked a lot inside of Cisco to utilize these capabilities for even internal consumption for different methods that we try to perform when we're doing professional services for customers. So it is evolving completely, and it's become a primary method, if you will, of the company to perform actions against customer networks due to some of the embedded capabilities that it has.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting this evolution. And which tools do you use now to enable Network as a Code at Cisco Customer Experience?
So when we look at overall, right, when we look at the capability of Network as Code, right, it's built on the foundation of infrastructure as code. And if you look at what infrastructure as code is, right, from many years ago, it started in cloud infrastructure, right? That's where things like Terraform came to exist, right? How do you automate infrastructure in the cloud? And most of all the infrastructure in the cloud is all ephemeral, right? They're just virtualized components or elements that you construct and deconstruct where you want. So there are things that come and they go all the time, right? So why did it become infrastructure as code? Well, the element of infrastructure as code comes from the fact that instead of you having like automation that just runs and performs an action against some infrastructure, you take the approach of declaring what that infrastructure is. And when you take that process and you declare what the infrastructure is, you're taking a completely different approach than if you just are doing a little bit of Ansible or a little bit of Terraform, right? So one of the reasons why this is popular in cloud is because when it was built, or the infrastructure is built in the cloud, it was done mostly by developers. And developers tend to do things in such a way that they're trying to embed as much automation in the infrastructure building process to make it seamless. So it allows them to continuously change that infrastructure. And one of the things that they add to that capability is also the ability to perform tests and validations to the config. So when you look at infrastructure as code, now you have to look at it from the perspective of not only that you're performing a configuration change, it's also that you're performing a series of validation checks to ensure that that capability that you're doing, that change that you're trying to make in the network, is actually completed successfully. And this is kind of the big key thing. So when you look at it from a tooling perspective of network as code, that means that it's not only the underlying automation engine that is pushing the changes out to the network, but it is also the capability of including both test and validation in there. And it's done in a way that you want to do a lot of checks before, right? A change is going to come in, and checks going to happen afterwards. So which tools do we use to do these capabilities, to put this structure in place? Is a couple of tools. One is called NAC Validate, right? For Network as Code Validate. It's an open source tool that we provide. It's available in PyPy. And what it does is that tool verifies and does a complete check of what is, how I say this. Let me share this really quick. It allows to view this. What is it that you're making changes to, that data structure that you're making changes to is correct? So what I mean by this is, I suppose you instead of you going in to Ansible or Terraform and creating both data structures and processes and structures that are going to perform an action. When you're doing network as code, you do this by simply creating a data structure. So we have this YAML data structure that represents the network overall. I'm showing you here an example that would have looked like from a perspective of ACI as code, or the Nexus network as code for ACI. And what it does is, you can see here, a whole structure, and each one of these elements, we know what is the value that should be exist in this parameter. So if it's a string, it's a string. But if it's an IP address, or it's a MAC address, or it's an enumerated, supposed to be only a set of values in an enumerated list, we capture those in these schemas, and this NAC validate checks those. In addition to that, it also has the ability to build rule sets. And these rule sets allow you to perform checks against specific values that, even though might be true, right? They're value, you might not allow them. So these rule sets are a way for a customer or an operator to sit down and say, look, I only want a specific parameter set in a certain way in the network, right? So for example, an operator for ACI might say, I want to make sure that all my bridge domains are always set to type of flooding, right? I don't want to have them set to anything else but flooding. So if that's the value that's set, then what we do is we can look into this through the rules and say, these must be set to these specific values. And then the rule set would invalidate any configuration change coming in that is not past that muster, right? But we do this in a CI/CD format where you can embed these in different branching strategies inside of your source code manager. And at that point in time, what happens is, now very fast, right, the operator knows that this condition is not allowed. So this is incredibly valuable, because this avoids the situation of you finding yourself, right, like Saturday, 2 in the morning, in the middle of a change window, and it's like, oh, something failed, automation failed because some value, right, was incorrect, right, which is the worst time, right? You want those windows to just go smooth, and because you don't want to spend time there. So it gives you the ability to catch things early and avoid that condition of these failing this way. So that's the pre-change, right? So this is what happens on pre-change. But we also include as another tool, NAC test. And what this tool does is gives you the ability to also perform post-change checks. So what are those post-change checks? So the first one that we include by default in everything we do is to check and make sure that the configuration that is on the network device matches what is on the data model structure, right? Because again, when you look at this, this is declarative configuration. You are saying, I declare what the network configuration is going to be, and I intend that needs to be in the infrastructure itself. So we verify now that each of these two things match. But we've also constructed on the structure an additional level, which is called expected states. We're little by little building and expanding this capability. But it would do things like, for example, in this example I'm showing here for a VXLAN VPN fabric with that would check to see expected states on the leaf. So in this case, we're using ISIS as an underlay routing protocol. And what we're putting in defining the data model is, hey, I expect to see certain parameters, certain values in ISIS neighbor relationships, which means I'm expecting to see the spines to be of a certain, be there. My neighbor's supposed to be X, Y, or Z. And in this case, we would verify those. So this would be a catch and be like, okay, I made a change. And I look, and now after I made the change, one of the spines is not responding. It's not a neighbor anymore. So that's a condition that you can catch and then say, whoa, stop, something's wrong. And potentially at that point in time, use infrastructure as code to then revert to the previous configuration overall.
Yeah, thanks. Rafael, you mentioned about Ansible, Terraform. I remember that back in days your team reached out to us and we help you to migrate a lot of Terraform modules and providers to Cisco DevNet GitHub org, and then we added to Terraform registry to OpenTofu registry. I want to ask how you work with like customers. How do you receive this request, like feature request, or what to change? Is like through GitHub issues, or it's like directly one-on-one conversation with users, with customers?
Great question. So there's two elements of what we do. One of those elements is if you are using the capability on the open source side, right, free open source element of Network as Code, if you're using it from that element, then you can open a GitHub issue on the repositories that are at NetAsCode community space inside of github.com, right? If you are a services as code customer, right? So now we're giving you service of this capability, helping you accelerate the capability going forward, then the team inside of Cisco will take care of that. So you don't have to worry about it. We would just sit down, open the issues, would manage it, do the code changes, and what we do. In regards to how overall structure, we look at it holistically. So if there's a requirement or a change that we need to make a change to the provider, we will do that for the customers, right? Because we look at it as a whole concept, right? From a person that is using the capability is not going to care that it's a module or a resource or it's the provider code, etc. It's just one specific outcome that they're tracking, and we would just go after that particular one and just solve it directly for that.
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned a couple of times that you propose it as a part of customer service as well. So am I right that the customer can find information about this on NetAsCode.cisco.com site? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've done is we have for everyone. So on both open source and for everybody else, there is a website. It's called NetAsCode.cisco.com. The site of NetAsCode.cisco.com, what it does is that it gives you a chance for you to check every detail that there is about the site. So I want to share here really quick to show you guys what it looks like. And what we've done is in here, you can see that from a documentation perspective, we have a series of guides and we have different structures. The most common thing that everybody looks at is the data models. And here on the data model side, you can see the different capabilities that we are currently working on. Stuff that's new and active, stuff that's work in progress. And all of these contain details of what's needed to be able to utilize the capability. Because this is the data model itself. So if I were to look, let's say for ACI under tenants and look at the bridge domain structure, in here you can see example of the bridge domain and some details and different examples for you to look at in regards to what is the definition, right? These easily can be copied into and as a way to build your own data model, structure representation of the network too. For customers that have existing elements of this capability, right? Having an existing ACI fabric, Cisco, as part of the service, can take the current configuration of, let's say, your ACI fabric and convert it into the data model in such a way that it accelerates for you to get started and going with this. If not, then usually a customer starts by breaking the ACI configuration in tenants and utilizing the capability for some specific tenants.
Yes, thanks. I will add the link to the site at the video description. And can you share an example of real-world problems that Network as a Code has helped solve for Cisco customers, or some most common problems?
Absolutely. So I think I'll give you one example. It's now a couple of years old, but I think it's one that hits home very well as an example for people to kind of grasp what some of these things are. We were working with a particular customer in this particular situation where they were trying to do migrations in data centers, and they were just running into issues. Now, this customer was doing everything through method of procedures, right? So they had mock documents, hundreds, if not, thousands of pages long, that would just be like, hey, go to this part, click tenant, add bridge domain, whatever, add bridge domain. And, they would just put everything in there one by one. And what was happening is that the customer would start the process, put 10, 12 people in there to start working to do this manual process. And, we just literally burn the weekend trying to get through the method of procedure to get all the tasks completed. And it just coming on Monday morning, they still wouldn't be completed, because we all know, right? You go in with a method procedure, you go in with a build book, you have a cable plant, mistakes are made, cables put in the wrong places. You have all these issues that happen, and it's such a massive change of your network. Well, for this particular customer situation was just like that. And what they asked us to do was automate the whole process, which we did. And then what ended up happening is we showed up with this capability, we put into the network and, executed the change in about, I think like 90 minutes. It took long time. We're talking about 50,000 lines of declared configuration inside this network. It's a big fabric, right? That was being done. And then what ended up happening, right, is that, believe it or not, this started on a Friday, we still spent the whole weekend, working on the network. It didn't just suddenly, automation didn't come and suddenly oh, we don't have nothing to do. Oh no, we had a ton of things to do, because at the end, the cables were identified incorrectly. Things were put on the wrong ports. You know how this is in normal network. Nothing goes as planned. But it gave the weekend to do exactly what needed to be done and fix everything. So we got to the point, in this part that was ACI, that we had every tenant with 0 faults inside of Fabric, because we had the time, right? It had time to sit down and investigate everything, be like, okay, fix this, fix that, the other thing. So then Monday morning came and boom, the network was running pristine, no issues, right? So I think it shows the value. Sometimes people say automation just going to take over and do everything. No, I think automation just gives you a window of time. It gives you breathing room to sit down and fix all the nuances that networks bring to the table that are not, don't show up in PowerPoint, right? Just little easy little boxes. Everybody's happy, this is just going to work. No, it doesn't work that way. The advantage to do is that afterwards too is, again, all these steps involved changes, testing, verification that when you made a change, the change was done correctly. Verification. So all these little nuances just helped along the way to make that scenario work out really well. And today what we have is the same situation with more and more customers doing this, because it's not only the fact that they want to, they want to automate, they want to verify, right? So when they go in to make a change to the network, that they utilize this capability in such a way that's easy for them to say, I made a change and I've verified the change, right? And then if something doesn't go right, it's easy for me to use the inherent version control of source code management, like GitHub and GitLab, to then be able to go back and historically say, this is what happened. This is the change that was there. Okay, let's change it back or revert it or whatever we need to do to address it. So that's just one of the examples for that particular customer where we do this. And some of the customers have gotten to the point, right, that they've reached the same thing that they've done in cloud, right? This is the part that people want to get. That sometimes the network operators are like, oh man, that's not what I want to hear. But in some instances, some people have been able to take their network to the same category as their cloud counterparts, where the automation is the only thing that holds the key that can make changes to the network, right? And that point of view is like, it's real easy. It avoids a situation of a network operator mistakenly going into a box, making a change incorrectly or causing problems, because you can use this whole structure to avoid that situation.
Yeah, it's an excellent example. And how does automation with network as a code impact network security and reliability in these cases?
It's a really good question. I think in the end, if I were to look at it from the perspective of security, one of the things that network as code will do is that it will tell you that, hey, this is what you're declaring the network is supposed to be, and you're putting it in code like it's in here. If what's in this area doesn't match what's in the product, then you start asking some serious questions like, why? Why did that happen, right? And so that's kind of like one thing in there. If you look today, majority of customers have network equipment. They have, I'll say, a distributed source of truth, right? Meaning that the gear is the one that has a source of truth, right? I think that's the mentality that we all share from network engineering. Like, if I want to know what that box is doing, I need to do it. But the problem at the end of the day is, like, if somebody goes in and changes a port or does something that's less secure, then who knows, right? I mean, there's no record that it changed. It just changed. So it gives you the ability to control a little bit more in that aspect, and it controls. You can utilize things like the rule sets that I've talked about in Act Validate as a way to incorporate security elements into the data model itself. So if somebody were to go ahead and make a change and you can catch it on the rule sets, it would cache that and say, like, hey, that's not enough, that we're not allowed to do this, right? Or you can go in and, like, I'm going to use a silly example, but might say, hey, I just want to turn on telnet on a device, and you might say that's not allowed. So if they go and try to do it in the data model, they'll be like, that's not allowed, can't do that. So, and now we'll take that and look at all the different elements, and I'm not a security expert here, but look at all the elements of configurations that potentially you might say, I need to be enforced. And you can do those in the data model and say, this needs to be implemented in the configuration of the device. And you can implement those with default values too. So we can embed default values inside of the data model and require them in such a way that a device that's being added or configuration pushed will automatically get that configuration pushed.
Yeah, thanks. I have heard about this multiple times on different conferences, on communities like Source of Trust. Like, when customers comes to you, what's your suggestions? Which methods, tools to use to build this source of trust?
Source of trust or source of truth?
Source of truth.
Yeah. Okay. When we talk about source of truth, at the end of the day, is think of it as there's a single place, right, in code, stored the definition of what the network is going to look like, right? So if you're using ACI or Nexus dashboard or using vManage, what you do is you say, this is the declared configuration in there. You don't go back to vManage or APIC or anybody else and start making changes there, because you're just going to break you're going to have now a split brain situation, right? So now the configuration or the source of truth sits there. So what's the challenge with that? Well, obviously, Oleksii, I mean, you can imagine, right? Network operators and network architects, they're used to one thing and one thing only, right? SSH to the box or go to the GUI, make whatever changes you want to make, and go home. I'm done, right? So this is one of the things that is the most challenging part about network as code. And it's not network as code, it's infrastructure as code, right? And the same thing applies. Like, let me give you an example. If you have infrastructure as code definitions to configure your AWS virtual private cloud and all those elements, you don't go to AWS and start clicking on the GUI and adding stuff to it, right? The majority of people know that, number one, because it's ephemeral. And more people would just delete it and bring it back and would go, whatever you thought was going to happen is not coming back. But in the case of network as code, then it requires a change. And the change that it requires is how you operate your network. And this is the big challenge that we face, that network operators face, that everybody faces when they try to implement this. Because the nature of the networking world has always been, I will go into the box, make the change that I need to do, right? I need to go and add switch port access VLAN to that switch, add another VLAN on that trunk, and I'm done for the day, whatever. To, hey, we need to open a ticket, potentially, right? If there's things like ServiceNow integration or something, that then it says, hey, we're going to make this change to the network. It gets approved. It gets run through. Automation changes done to the data model. It's scheduled. The change is scheduled. And it pushes through the network onto the devices. The reality is that requires a complete change in the way you operate your network. So this is the reason why most of the time when we're talking to customers, when we talk to their C-suite, right, we talk to their CIOs and their CTOs and all those C-level people, they all want this capability implemented. They look at their cloud counterparts and they say, I want that on the networking side. So the networking team is would push back more and says, well, this is going to make things harder for us. But it's the gain that you have by utilizing this capability to ensure that these changes not only are made, but the changes are made with the inclusion of testing and validation components to run with it, to make sure that it went in correctly, to let you know that, hey, here's a versions of every change that happened. You can see exactly what happened along the way. And it gives you much better control overall of the network. But it does require a change of how you think and you operate. So that to me, I think, is the biggest thing in all conversations I have seen with people in this thing. And when talking about this is, how do you adopt infrastructure as code, right? Forget about network code, infrastructure as code into your network, compared to just doing things like, hey, I'm going to just write an Ansible playbook that's going to go and touch 10 boxes and, add switch port access VLAN to something, or make a change to NTP or whatever it is. And then you run that automation, you run that playbook, it does the things that you want, and then you shelve it in the corner and next one I have to do something else. It's so different an approach overall.
Yeah, thanks. And inside the companies, who usually cares and implement network as a code? Is it network administrator, net DevOps, architects?
Usually what we see is that there is a request from C-level that they're interested in this capability. They want to have a way to ensure that network changes happen much faster, much secure, and that we avoid human error, right? When you think about it, 70+% or whatever it is of all network outages today are caused by human error on the keyboard. So how do you avoid all that? And I think C-level is the one that primarily comes in and says, hey, I want to implement something that is completely autonomous in that fact. And today, everybody wants to sprinkle some AI on top of that too, right? And put this and the other thing and be like, hey, we're going to get all this stuff done. But I think one of the things, and we've embedded AI into the capability of NetAsCode, right? So we have AI assistants to help users with the data model structure, right? And help them through finding issues and stuff like that. We have all that done in there. But the big advantage that we have with our structure for it in this capability with using AI is that the layer underneath, right, NAC validate and NAC test are there to catch anything that potentially AI missed, right? Because all these are strictly followed. These rules are strictly followed in regards to how those are done. So to me, I view it as C-level really wants to do this. Then what happens is then the network team tries to find if there's by any chance anybody in the company already doing DevOps, right? So when at that point in time you get into the situation of like, oh look, this team of people that are working and doing development inside the company already have pipeline software, already have source code managers, right? So now it just becomes a matter of getting a little slice of that infrastructure, and boom, you're there, right? And this is one of the things that the services as code part of Cisco, right? Part of the CX professional services works with you to assist you and drive you in that aspect, right? Because our preference is to utilize infrastructure that already exists in the network that you have from your DevOps organization, right? If you have one. If not, we can help and bring some tooling for you easily to do this. But interacting with the DevOps organization you have and all that stuff would be the best approach. It would provide the best results.
Yeah, thanks. My last question, what advice would you give to engineers and organizations who wants to start their journey with network as a code?
The first thing that I would say to everyone is understand what infrastructure as code is all about, right? Like look at that, dig into a little bit. The second part would be go to netascode.cisco.com. Not only have we done things in the space of providing a ton of documentation, we're also working little by little to build capabilities that I think would be really valuable. I want to share an example of something we're doing. If you go into the site and go onto guides, we are starting to put together some elements of labs and different equipment availability for persons to start with. I'll show you one example that we currently release for Nexus dashboard as code for VXLAN and VPN fabrics. We have created a learning lab here that's available in vCloud. And what it does is it goes through step by step of what is it that you would need to do and the capability to understand it. And what we've done is we included different things like understanding what the different concepts are for infrastructure as code, to how to set up the environment or set up everything specifically for how you're going to work with it. So you get to see both how it looks inside of an integrated development environment, how it looks inside of a pipeline software. We use GitLab, and get to see how the pipeline execution occurs, right? So we look down here, you can get to see the whole process of this happen here. So let me go here really quick, and you'll be able to see, examples here of using GitLab step by step and how to do it. So it's a great way to kind of start looking at this. But the website has tons of information about everything we're doing. We're expanding the site daily, update with new information, new capabilities, putting new elements that are useful to you to explore and understand how network as code works. Also, if you are visit Cisco Live, we also have many series of sessions that we are currently presenting on Cisco Live across the globe. And those sessions go into detail, so you get time to spend with experts of Cisco of Network as Code on different areas. We got SD-WAN and Nexus Dashboard, ACI. We have labs, instructor-led labs in Cisco Live that also go through this step-by-step. You get a chance to do it, and you also can go in Cisco Live walk-in labs. We have like 7 or 8 different walk-in labs now where people would just go in and like in 40 minutes, you would get a chance to get your hands on it, get to see and play with it, and get familiar with all these concepts, etc. overall. So we have we've grown this capability. We're continuously to grow the capability. We're expanding to different areas. I mean, I think in a year or two, we might have covered the full portfolio of Cisco products in general and have the ability for you to easily implement infrastructure as code from both direct to device through controllers or to SaaS version cloud controllers that we have.
Yeah, thanks, Rafael. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for sharing all this information and things.
No, you're welcome. It's great talking to everybody. Have a good one.